Álvaro pawed on the edge of the cliff with both hands, and the sharp reef was below. Álvaro was too scared to move, grabbing the sand with both hands. As time went on, Álvaro's physical strength gradually lost, and he was almost unable to hold on. How did he save himself? This is a movie, adapted from real events. Álvaro and his girlfriend Ana quarreled, and went to the beach alone to relax. Unexpectedly, his foot slipped. He grasped desperately with both hands, but there was sand all around him. After sliding for a certain distance, it finally stopped. Álvaro tensed all his muscles, trembling with fear. At this moment, he heard the phone ringing, and when he stretched out his hand to get the phone, his body suddenly slipped down again, which made him grab the sand in a hurry, stabilize his body, and slowly reach for the backpack with the other hand, but it still failed. Fortunately, both feet stepped on the edge and did not fall, but this consumes a lot of energy, and Álvaro is almost unable to hold on.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
At this time, he was counting the time it would take for the waves to hit the rocks, and he wanted to take advantage of the swell of the waves and jump off. Suddenly, the waves hit again, and Álvaro jumped off. Although he successfully jumped into the sea, the impact was too great and his body still hit the rocks. At this time, try to swim out of the water with all your strength. Álvaro was glad that he was still alive, and came to a reef, panting heavily. He thought it was just a cut palm. But when he stood up, the hip bone in his waist suddenly broke, and he fell heavily on the rocks, and passed out. After an unknown amount of time, he was woken up by the sea water, and checked his feet immediately. Fortunately, he could still move his toes. He quickly took out his mobile phone, and wanted to call for help. But the phone has been submerged in water and cannot be turned on. He yelled helplessly towards the hill.
Ayuda! Ayuda! Ayuda!
This piece is uninhabited sea, no one comes at all. Álvaro had no choice but to take off his shirt, first wrapped up the wound on his hand, and then lay down on the reef and passed out. When he woke up again, it was almost dark. He must leave the reef as soon as possible, and he will die here when the tide is high. He looked around, then put on his backpack, and went into the water, ready to swim to the shore. The severe pain was unbearable for him. Álvaro could only groan in pain while waving his arms, and persisting until his muscles spasmed. He couldn't hold on any longer, and slowly sank into the sea. When his feet touched the bottom of the sea, he suddenly thought of his girlfriend Ana. He burst out with great strength, quickly swam to the sea surface, and successfully surfaced. The raging waves were coming towards him, so he quickly took off his backpack and hung it on the reef. Only then did he stabilize his body. He held on to the pack, and the waves beat against him until he passed out. I don't know how long it took. The sea water receded, and a seagull woke him up painfully by pecking at his wound. He immediately untied his backpack, and climbed onto the beach with difficulty. At this point, 24 hours had passed since he fell off the cliff. Álvaro is severely dehydrated. Seeing the drinks thrown away by others on the beach, he picked them up excitedly, and it was full of sea water. He could only continue to crawl, but during the crawl, his arm was hooked by the hook, and Álvaro endured the pain to pull it out. At night, he collects a roll of tinfoil and a drinking glass by the rock. He dug a hole in the sand, then tore off a piece of tinfoil and spread it over it. He was so thirsty that he was going to drink his own urine. Álvaro threw himself on everything he could to keep out the cold and hid between two boulders, but he was still shivering. At this time he saw several thunderbolts suddenly appeared in the sky. He hurriedly spread tinfoil on the pit, and put the water cup in place, preparing for a heavy rain. The rain stopped after only a few drops. Álvaro licked all the beads of water off the paper. The next day, he pretended to be dead by leaning against a rock, holding a stick in his hand, and sneaking eyes at the seagull. When the seagulls approached, unfortunately, the reaction was slow, and the seagull flew away. He cursed loudly. Just when Álvaro was in despair, he suddenly heard a burst of cell phone ringing. He hurriedly looked around and finally found his mobile phone under the sand. Inside the phone is a video from my parents. He couldn't wait to shout for help, but his parents still spoke to the camera. Only then did Álvaro realize that this was a pre-recorded video, not a video call. Álvaro fell into despair again. When he thought of his family, his girlfriend, and a group of good brothers, he quickly rekindled his hope of survival. He looked around and found a surfboard not far away. He climbed towards the surfboard. He was very happy when he touched the surfboard. Álvaro draws a mayday signal on the sand. Looking at the rolling waves in the distance, he reminded himself. Suddenly, he seemed to see a ship on the sea. With the last of his strength, he tied the surfboard to his hands, and crawled desperately towards the sea. Although the waves beat against Álvaro's face again and again, Álvaro did not back down, but paddled harder, because he knew that this was his last hope. While paddling, he shouted for help. But soon, his body had reached its limit and he passed out again. Suddenly, a black shadow appeared on the sea. A man in a wetsuit quickly swam up to him, put an oxygen mask on him, and rescued him up. Álvaro was finally rescued after being trapped for 48 hours. When he woke up again, Álvaro was already in the hospital, and he couldn't help crying.